The day had already been too long for Amara Chen. As the clock in her car showed 11:37 p.m., she let out a deep sigh and rolled her shoulders back, trying to ease the tension that had built up during her 16-hour shift at Memorial Hospital. The weight of 3 back-to-back surgeries, the last one an emergency procedure on a 10-year-old boy, still pressed heavily on her mind and body. The streets were quiet now. Most people in the small town of Riverdale were tucked away in their homes, but Amara still had another 20 minutes of driving before she could collapse into her own bed. Her eyelids felt heavy, but not from alcohol, just pure exhaustion. The blue and red lights flashing in her rearview mirror jolted her from her tired days. Amara checked her speedometer. She was going exactly 5 miles under the limit, deliberately careful because of her fatigue. What now? She mumbled to herself, carefully pulling over to the side of the road. She reached for her purse on the passenger seat, fishing out her wallet for her license and registration. This was the 3rd time she'd been pulled over in the last 2 months, and each time the officer had let her go without a ticket after checking her credentials. Being one of the few surgeons of Asian descent in a predominantly white town made her car, a modest Honda Civic, stand out more than she would have liked. Through her side mirror, Amara watched a tall officer approach. The beam from his flashlight swept across her license plate before landing directly in her side mirror, momentarily blinding her. She squinted and angled the mirror away slightly. The officer tapped on her window with the end of his flashlight. Amara pressed the button to lower it, putting on her best attempt at a polite smile despite her fatigue. "License and registration," the officer said without preamble, not even bothering to explain why he had pulled her over. "Good evening, officer," Amara said, handing over the documents she had already prepared. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" The officer, whose nameplate read Jenkins, ignored her question. He took the documents and shined his flashlight directly at them, then at her face, lingering longer than necessary. "Where are you coming from?" Officer Jenkins asked, his tone already carrying an edge of suspicion. "I'm coming from Memorial Hospital. I just finished a 16-hour shift." "I'm a surgeon there," Amara explained, gesturing to her blue scrub still visible under her light jacket. Officer Jenkins sniffed loudly, an exaggerated action that made his intention clear before he even spoke. "Been drinking tonight, ma'am?" The question caught Amara off guard. "No, not at all. I've been in surgery most of the day. I don't drink, especially not when I'm working or driving." Jenkins leaned closer to her window, making a show of sniffing the air around her. "I smell alcohol. Step out of the vehicle, please." "Officer, there's no alcohol. I just told you I came straight from the hospital." "You can call and verify. I said step out of the vehicle," Jenkins repeated, his voice hardening. His hand moved to rest on his belt near his holster, a subtle but clear message. Amara felt a knot forming in her stomach. She had heard stories from colleagues, stories about encounters with certain officers in the department who had reputations for targeting non-white drivers. Until now, she had been lucky enough to avoid them. It seemed her luck had run out. Slowly, she unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the car door. As she stepped out, she realized it had started to drizzle. Perfect, she thought, just perfect. "Stand over here," Jenkins directed, pointing to a spot in front of her car, where the headlights would illuminate her and make her visible to any passing vehicles. It was late, but this was still one of the main roads into town. Anyone driving by would see her. Amara stood where directed, crossing her arms over her chest both from the chill of the night air and from a growing sense of unease. Her surgical cap was still stuffed in her jacket pocket, and she had tied her long black hair into a messy bun hours ago. She knew she looked every bit like someone who had spent all day in an operating room, because she had. "So you folks don't drink, huh?" Jenkins said, walking in a circle around her as if inspecting merchandise. "That's not what I hear." Amara blinked, taken aback by the comment with its clear racial undertone. "Excuse me?" "Nothing," Jenkins replied with a smirk. "Let's do some tests to make sure you're safe to be on the road." "Officer, I'm perfectly sober. I'm just tired from working all day saving lives. If you breathalyze me, you'll see my blood alcohol content is 0. Oh, we'll get to that. But first, let's check your coordination." The smirk never left his face as he added, "Some people just naturally have trouble with these tests. You understand?" A car drove by, slowing down to gawk at the scene. Amara felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. She was standing in her scrubs in the drizzling rain. about to be subjected to a sobriety test she didn't need, all because an officer had decided she looked suspicious. Walk in a straight line, heel to toe, 9 steps forward and then back, Jenkins instructed, standing back with his arms crossed. Despite her exhaustion, Amara performed the task perfectly. Years of standing for hours during delicate surgeries had given her excellent balance and body control. Jenkins frowned slightly. Now stand on one foot, raise the other 6 inches off the ground and count to 30. Again, Amara completed the task without wavering. The drizzle had turned into a steady rain now, and her scrubs were getting damp, clinging uncomfortably to her skin. Jenkins's frown deepened. Now I want you to stand on one foot, extend your arms, close your eyes, and recite the alphabet backward. Amara stared at him. That's not a standard field sobriety test. Are you refusing to comply? Jenkins took a step toward her, his hand again drifting toward his belt. No, I'm just saying that's not Z, Y, X. Start counting. Jenkins cut her off, struggling to maintain her composure. Amara closed her eyes and began. Z, Y, X. She wobbled slightly as she concentrated on both balancing and the mental task, but managed to continue. V-U-T. Louder, Jenkins commanded. I can't hear you. Amara raised her voice, aware that another car was slowing down to watch. SRQP, you're swaying. That's a sign of intoxication, Jenkins said, though she had barely moved. I'm standing on one foot in the rain after 16 hours of surgery, Amara replied, her patience wearing thin. Just keep going. By the time she reached A, Amara was shivering from the rain and suppressed anger. Her legs ached from the strain of the unnatural position. Now, I want you to walk in a circle, touching your nose with alternating hands every second step, while counting by 7s from 100, Jenkins said, not bothering to hide his amusement anymore. Amara stared at him in disbelief. That's not a real test. Ma'am, are you a police officer? Do you know what the standard tests are? Actually, as a doctor, I'm familiar with neurological tests for coordination and sobriety, and what you're asking isn't standard protocol. It's not even reasonable. Jenkins stepped closer, his face just inches from hers. Listen, Dr. Chen, if that's really what you are, I decide what tests to perform here. Not you. You people always think you know better than everyone else, don't you? The you people hung in the air between them, its meaning unmistakable. Amara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. Another vehicle approached, slowing down more dramatically than the others. It was a dark SUV with tinted windows, and it pulled up behind Jenkins' patrol car, parking on the shoulder. Amara couldn't see who was inside through the rain and darkness. 19386, Amara began, walking in a circle as instructed, touching her nose on every second step. She felt ridiculous, humiliated, and increasingly angry, but mostly she felt powerless. Jenkins watched with obvious satisfaction. Slower and louder. I want to make sure you're not slurring. I'm not slurring because I'm not drunk, Amara said through gritted teeth, but continued the absurd test anyway. 79, 72, 65. She was aware of the SUV's door opening, but was too focused on not losing her balance on the wet pavement to look over. The rain was coming down harder now, plastering her hair to her face. Now hop on one foot and pat your head while rubbing your stomach, Jenkins said, barely containing his laughter. That was it. Amara stopped moving. Officer, this is ridiculous and inappropriate. You've had me perform multiple coordination tests that I've passed. I'm clearly not intoxicated. I'd like you to breathalyze me now or let me go. Jenkins's amusement vanished, replaced by a hard glare. Are you refusing to comply with a police officer's instructions? That's grounds for arrest, Dr. Chen. Amara stood her ground, though her heart was racing. I'm not refusing a legitimate sobriety test. I'm refusing to be mocked and humiliated for your entertainment. Jenkins took another step toward her, his hand now firmly on his handcuffs. Put your hands behind your back. Is there a problem here, Officer Jenkins? A new voice called out from behind them. Both Amara and Jenkins turned to see a man approaching from the SUV holding an umbrella. He was wearing plain clothes, a button-up shirt and slacks, but his posture and the way Jenkins immediately straightened up suggested he was someone with authority. Amara stood in the rain, her scrubs now completely soaked, waiting to see what would happen next. 5 minutes ago, she had been a respected surgeon on her way home from saving lives. Now she was standing in the rain, being treated like a criminal for no reason other than the officer's prejudice. She wondered what karma had in store for Officer Jenkins as the newcomer walked closer. His face set in an expression that suggested this night was about to take yet another turn. The man from the SUV approached with measured steps. His umbrella held high enough to reveal his face, stern, mid-40s, with deep-set eyes that took in the scene with a calculating gaze. The rain drummed steadily against the fabric above him, a sharp contrast to Amara, who stood soaked to the bone. "Captain Rodriguez," Officer Jenkins said, his tone immediately shifting to something resembling respect, though the stiffness in his posture suggested it was forced. "Just conducting a standard field sobriety test. Driver showed signs of intoxication." Rodriguez glanced at Amara, taking in her drenched surgical scrubs, the hospital ID still clipped to her jacket, and the exhaustion evident on her face. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "I see," he said simply. "And what signs were those exactly?" Jenkins cleared his throat. "Erratic driving pattern, and I detected the odor of alcohol when I approached the vehicle." "I was driving under the speed limit," Amara interjected, water dripping from her hair into her eyes. She wiped it away with the back of her hand. "And I haven't had a drop of alcohol. I just finished a 16-hour shift at Memorial." Rodriguez turned to her. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Rodriguez, recently transferred to head the precinct here in Riverdale." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Amara shook it. His grip was firm but not aggressive. "Would you mind telling me your side of what's happening here?" Jenkins stepped forward. "Sir, with all due respect, I'm in the middle of—" "I didn't ask you, officer." Rodriguez cut him off without raising his voice. The quiet authority in his tone was enough to make Jenkins fall silent. "I'm asking the citizen you've got standing in the rain." Amara took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady despite the cold seeping through her wet clothes. "My name is Dr. Amara Chen. I'm a neurosurgeon at Memorial Hospital. I just finished an emergency procedure on a child with a brain bleed and was heading home when Officer Jenkins pulled me over. I wasn't speeding. I was actually driving below the limit because I'm tired." She gestured to her soaked scrubs. "He claimed he smelled alcohol, which is impossible because I don't drink. Then he ordered me out of my car to perform these tests, which have gotten increasingly ridiculous and humiliating. He just asked me to hop on one foot while patting my head and rubbing my stomach." Rodriguez's eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication of his surprise. He turned to Jenkins. "Is that a standard field sobriety test taught at the academy these days, officer?" Jenkins shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, sometimes we need to assess coordination using various methods to—" "That wasn't my question." Rodriguez interrupted again. "Is that a standard test?" "No, sir," Jenkins admitted reluctantly. "And the reciting the alphabet backward while balancing on one foot, is that standard?" Jenkins's jaw tightened. "No, sir." "I see." Rodriguez turned back to Amara. "Doctor, would you be willing to take a breathalyzer test right now to settle this matter?" "Absolutely," Amara said without hesitation. "That's what I've been asking for from the beginning instead of these performances." She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. Rodriguez nodded and turned to Jenkins. "Administer the breathalyzer, officer. Now." Jenkins hesitated, then walked back to his patrol car, his movements stiff with suppressed anger. While he retrieved the device, Rodriguez shifted his umbrella slightly to shield Amara from some of the rain. "I apologize for your discomfort, Dr. Chen," he said quietly. "How long have you lived in Riverdale?" "Almost 3 years," Amara replied, wrapping her arms around herself for warmth. "I came for the position at Memorial. They needed a neurosurgeon, and I needed a change from big city life." "And how many times have you been pulled over in those 3 years?" Amara met his gaze directly. 7 times. 5 in the last 6 months. Never received a ticket. Always routine checks or minor infractions that somehow don't warrant citations once my license shows I'm a doctor." Rodriguez's expression darkened slightly, but before he could respond, Jenkins returned with the breathalyzer. He held it out to Amara with barely concealed disdain. "You know how this works?" he asked. "Yes, I'm familiar," Amara replied coolly. Under Rodriguez's watchful eye, Jenkins had no choice but to administer the test properly. Amara took a deep breath and blew steadily into the device. They all watched as the machine processed the sample. And then the result flashed on the screen, 0.00%. "As expected," Amara said softly. Jenkins stared at the device as if it had personally betrayed him. These machines can be faulty sometimes. Oh? Rodriguez said. Then perhaps we should take Dr. Chen to the station and administer another test. Of course, that would mean paperwork explaining why you detained a sober citizen, pulled her out into the rain after a 16-hour hospital shift, and made her perform non-standard sobriety tests that could be construed as humiliating. Jenkins swallowed hard. That won't be necessary, sir. No, I didn't think so. Rodriguez's voice was calm but carried an unmistakable edge. Dr. Chen, you're free to go. I apologize for the inconvenience. That's it? Amara asked, not quite believing it could end so simply. Not quite, Rodriguez replied, glancing at Jenkins. Officer Jenkins will be escorting you home to ensure you arrive safely after this. Unnecessary delay. Given your long shift, it seems the appropriate course of action. Isn't that right, officer? The look on Jenkins's face was a mixture of disbelief and barely contained rage. Sir, I still have my patrol to complete. Consider this part of your patrol. Rodriguez cut in smoothly. Making sure a valuable member of our community gets home safely after saving a child's life today. He turned back to Amara. Dr. Chen, please get back in your car out of this rain. Officer Jenkins will follow you home. I'll be reviewing the dashcam footage of this stop as part of our department's ongoing commitment to community relations. Amara nodded, too exhausted and cold to argue. As she walked back to her car, she heard Rodriguez speak to Jenkins in a low voice. And, officer, I expect you to wait until she's safely inside before you leave. I'll be calling her tomorrow to confirm. Inside her car, Amara cranked the heater to full blast, her hands shaking as she gripped the steering wheel. The encounter had left her drained in a way that even 16 hours of surgery hadn't. Through her rearview mirror, she saw Rodriguez and Jenkins still talking, the captain's posture rigid with authority, while Jenkins seemed to shrink with each passing moment. As she pulled away from the curb, Jenkins reluctantly got back into his patrol car to follow her. In her mirror, she saw Rodriguez watching them leave, still standing in the rain, making a call on his phone. The drive home took less than 15 minutes. Amara kept checking her mirror, half expecting Jenkins to disappear at the first opportunity. But the patrol car remained steadfastly behind her all the way to her modest house in a quiet neighborhood. As she pulled into her driveway, she noticed Mrs. Patel, her elderly neighbor, peering out through her curtains, clearly concerned about the police car. Amara gave a small wave to indicate everything was fine, though she wasn't sure that was true. She sat in her car for a moment, gathering her strength for the short walk to her front door. The rain had finally stopped, but her clothes were still wet and the night air was chilly. She grabbed her purse and hospital bag, then stepped out and walked to her door without looking back at Jenkins's car. Her hands trembled slightly as she unlocked her door. Once inside, she flipped on the porch light and peeked through the side window. Jenkins was still parked at the curb, looking thoroughly displeased. He caught her watching and gave a curt nod before finally driving away. Amara leaned against her closed door, letting out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The events of the night played through her mind on repeat. The humiliation of being forced to perform those ridiculous tests, the unexpected arrival of Captain Rodriguez, and the look on Jenkins's face when his plan to humiliate her had backfired. She should feel relieved, maybe even satisfied, but all she felt was bone-deep exhaustion and a lingering sense of violation. This wasn't the first time she'd been profiled, and she doubted it would be the last despite Rodriguez's intervention. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Hannah, the nurse who had assisted in the surgery earlier. How's our little fighter doing? Any updates? The message reminded Amara of what really mattered. While Jenkins had been trying to make her hop around in the rain, 10-year-old Tommy was recovering from the brain surgery that would give him a chance at a normal life. In the grand scheme of things, Jenkins was a footnote, not the story. She texted back, "He's stable. Gonna check on him first thing tomorrow. Thanks for your help today." As she peeled off her wet scrubs and stepped into a hot shower, Amara thought about Captain Rodriguez. There had been something in his manner that suggested Jenkins's behavior hadn't come as a complete surprise. She wondered what tomorrow would bring for Officer Jenkins. The hot water washed away the physical discomfort of the night, but the memory of standing in the rain, being forced to perform like a circus animal for Jenkins's amusement, wouldn't fade so easily. Still, for the first time, Someone with authority had witnessed it firsthand. Maybe, just maybe, things could change. As she finally crawled into bed, Amara's last thought before drifting off to sleep was of Captain Rodriguez making that phone call in the rain. She couldn't help but wonder who he had been calling, and what it might mean for Officer Jenkins. Captain Rodriguez sat in his office early the next morning, a cup of coffee cooling on his desk as he reviewed the dashboard camera footage from Officer Jenkins's patrol car. The sound was surprisingly clear, capturing every word of the exchange. He paused the video, rubbed his eyes, and then continued watching, his expression growing grimmer by the minute. When the footage ended, he leaned back in his chair and glanced at the clock. 7:30 a.m. He'd been at the station since 5 a.m., having barely slept after witnessing Jenkins's behavior the night before. In his 22 years on the force, Rodriguez had seen his share of bad policing, but there was something particularly disturbing about the deliberate humiliation Jenkins had inflicted on Dr. Chen. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. Internal Affairs. "This is Detective Powell," a woman's voice answered. "Powell, it's Rodriguez over at Riverdale Precinct. I need to talk to you about one of my officers." 20 minutes later, Rodriguez was studying a file on his desk, Officer Jenkins's personnel record. 3 complaints in the last year, all from minority drivers, all dismissed due to lack of evidence beyond the driver's testimonies. The pattern was clear, but until now there had been no concrete proof. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, closing the file. Officer Jenkins walked in, looking rested and unfazed, as if the previous night had been nothing out of the ordinary. He stood at attention, but there was a hint of smugness in his expression that made Rodriguez's jaw tighten. "You wanted to see me, Captain?" Jenkins asked. "Sit down," Rodriguez replied, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Jenkins sat, his posture relaxed, almost casual. "If this is about last night, sir, I was just doing my job. You can never be too careful with potential DUIs." Rodriguez studied him for a moment, then turned his computer monitor around. "I've reviewed the dashcam footage, Jenkins." "All of it. Standard procedure?" Jenkins shrugged. "Driver showed signs of intoxication." "What signs exactly?" Rodriguez asked, keeping his voice measured. "Because the footage shows a woman in surgical scrubs, clearly exhausted, driving under the speed limit with her lights on, and staying perfectly within her lane." Jenkins shifted in his seat. "Some signs aren't visible on camera. There's instinct involved in—" "Let me stop you right there," Rodriguez interrupted. "I've been a police officer for over 2 decades. I know the signs of intoxication, and I know the difference between instinct and prejudice." He tapped a key on his keyboard and the footage began to play. Jenkins's voice came through clearly. "So you folks don't drink, huh?" "That's not what I hear." Rodriguez paused the video. "Want to explain that comment, officer?" Jenkins's confident demeanor faltered slightly. "It was just conversation, sir." "Was it?" Rodriguez played another clip. "You people always think you know better than everyone else, don't you?" The silence in the office was heavy. Jenkins looked away, then back at Rodriguez, his expression hardening. "Sir, with all due respect, you're new here. You don't understand how things work in Riverdale. Some communities need more scrutiny than others. It's just statistics." Rodriguez leaned forward. "Let me tell you what the statistics actually show, Jenkins. They show that you pull over non-white drivers at 3 times the rate of your colleagues. They show that these stops rarely result in citations or arrests, and they show that you've had 3 complaints filed against you in the past year alone." He pushed the personnel file across the desk. "Care to explain that pattern?" Jenkins glanced at the file but didn't touch it. "Those complaints were dismissed." "Yes, they were. Because until now it was your word against theirs." Rodriguez turned the monitor back around. "But now I have video evidence of you forcing a respected surgeon to perform humiliating acts on the side of the road after working a 16-hour shift saving lives." He stood up and walked around to the front of his desk, leaning against it as he looked down at Jenkins. "I've already spoken with Internal Affairs this morning. They're sending someone over to review the footage. I've also spoken with the chief." For the first time, genuine worry flashed across Jenkins's face. "The chief?" "Sir, this is being blown way out of proportion. It was a routine traffic stop." "There was nothing routine about it," Rodriguez replied coldly. "You abused your authority to humiliate a citizen based on her race. You violated department policy, professional standards, and quite possibly the law." Jenkins stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. You're going to take the word of some foreign doctor over a fellow officer? I've been on this force for 8 years. Sit down. Rodriguez's voice was quiet but left no room for argument. Dr. Chen is an American citizen and a respected member of this community. And yes, I am going to believe the evidence I see with my own eyes and hear with my own ears. Jenkins slowly lowered himself back into the chair, his face flushed with anger. Here's what happens now, Rodriguez continued. You're suspended pending the outcome of the IA investigation. Badge and gun on my desk. You can't, I can, and I am. This isn't a negotiation, Jenkins. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Then, with jerky movements, Jenkins unholstered his weapon, removed the clip, and placed it on the desk. His badge followed, landing with a metallic clink that seemed to echo in the quiet office. This isn't over, Jenkins muttered. You're right about that, Rodriguez agreed. It's just beginning. There will be a full investigation into all your traffic stops over the past year. Every complaint will be re-examined. And if this turns out to be a pattern rather than an isolated incident, you won't just lose your job. You could face charges. Jenkins stood up again, his hands balled into fists at his sides. My union rep will be in touch. I'm counting on it, Rodriguez replied evenly. In the meantime, stay away from Dr. Chen. If I hear that you've contacted her or gone anywhere near her, I'll add witness intimidation to the list of concerns. Are we clear? Jenkins didn't respond, just turned and stalked out of the office, slamming the door behind him. Rodriguez sighed and sat back down at his desk. He picked up his phone again and dialed another number. Memorial Hospital, how may I direct your call? A pleasant voice answered. I'd like to speak with Dr. Amara Chen, please. This is Captain Rodriguez from the Riverdale Police Department. While he waited to be connected, Rodriguez made a few notes in Jenkins's file. This kind of behavior didn't develop overnight, and he doubted Jenkins had learned it on his own. There were likely deeper issues within the department that needed addressing. Captain Rodriguez? Dr. Chen's voice came through the phone, sounding tired but alert. Is everything all right? Yes, Dr. Chen. I just wanted to check in with you after last night's incident and update you on the situation. I appreciate that, she replied. I'm about to check on my patient from yesterday, but I have a few minutes. I won't keep you long, Rodriguez assured her. I've reviewed the footage from Officer Jenkins's dash cam, and I've taken immediate action. He's been suspended pending a full investigation. There was a pause on the line. Really? The surprise in her voice was palpable. Yes, really. What happened to you last night was unacceptable, and I want you to know that it's being taken seriously. Another pause. Thank you, Captain. That's unexpected. In my experience, these things tend to get swept under the rug. Not on my watch, Rodriguez said firmly. I'd like to meet with you when you have time. There may be additional steps in the investigation that will require your involvement, but that's entirely your choice. I'll make time, Amara replied without hesitation. This isn't just about me. If it's happening to me, it's happening to others who might not have someone like you show up at the right moment. Rodriguez nodded, though she couldn't see him. That's my concern as well. My first responsibility is to the entire community, not to protecting bad officers. When do you want to meet? She asked. At your convenience. I understand your schedule is demanding. I'm off at 6 tonight. Would that work? Perfect, Rodriguez agreed. Would you prefer to meet at the station, your office, or somewhere neutral? Neutral might be best. There's a cafe called The Bean on Oak Street. It's usually quiet in the evening. The Bean at 6. I'll be there. Rodriguez paused, then added, Dr. Chen, I want to apologize again for what you experienced. It reflects poorly on our department, but please know that many officers do their jobs honorably. I'm committed to making sure all of them do. I appreciate that, Captain, Amara replied, her voice warming slightly. I've had positive interactions with other officers here. I don't paint everyone with the same brush. After ending the call, Rodriguez sat back in his chair thinking about the challenges ahead. Changing the culture of a police department wasn't easy, especially as an outsider who had only been in town for a month. Jenkins wouldn't be the only one who resented his actions. But the alternative, allowing that kind of behavior to continue unchecked, wasn't an option. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Powell at Internal Affairs. On my way. ETA 30 minutes. Rodriguez gathered the files and evidence he had compiled. This was just the beginning of what would likely be a long process, but it was a necessary one. As he had told Amara, his responsibility was to the entire community, and that included holding his officers accountable when they failed to uphold their oath. Outside his office window, he could see officers arriving for the day shift, unaware of the storm that was brewing. By the end of the day, everyone in the department would know that Officer Jenkins had been suspended, and they would be choosing sides. Rodriguez would have to navigate those waters carefully, maintaining his authority while encouraging the good officers to support the changes that were coming. It wouldn't be easy, but then again, doing the right thing rarely was. The Bean was a cozy cafe tucked between a bookstore and a florist on Oak Street. At 5:55 p.m., Captain Rodriguez arrived, dressed in plain clothes, jeans and a button-down shirt, rather than his uniform. He wanted this meeting to feel less official, more human. He chose a quiet corner table with a good view of the door and ordered a black coffee. Amara arrived precisely at 6, still in her hospital scrubs with a light jacket thrown over them. She looked tired but more composed than the last time he'd seen her. Standing drenched in the rain, she spotted him and walked over, her steps measured and purposeful. "Captain Rodriguez," she said with a small nod. "Please call me Miguel," he replied, standing briefly to greet her. "Thank you for making time for this." Amara sat down across from him. "I appreciate you taking action so quickly. Most people wouldn't have bothered." A server approached and Amara ordered a chai tea. When they were alone again, Rodriguez leaned forward slightly. "I wanted to update you on the situation in person," he began. "Jenkins has been suspended pending the investigation. Internal Affairs has the dashcam footage and they've already interviewed me about what I witnessed." "And what happens next?" Amara asked, wrapping her hands around the warm mug that the server had promptly delivered. "They'll want to interview you too if you're willing. Your testimony would strengthen the case significantly." Amara took a sip of her tea, considering his words. "Will it make a difference, really?" "In my experience, these situations often end with a slap on the wrist and the officer back on patrol a few weeks later." Rodriguez understood her skepticism. "I can't promise you specific outcomes. What I can tell you is that I'm personally committed to seeing this through. This isn't my first experience with officers who abuse their authority." Something in his tone made Amara look at him more closely. "You've dealt with this before." It wasn't a question, but Rodriguez nodded anyway. "In my previous precinct, an officer with a pattern of excessive force against Latino suspects. It took months, but eventually he was dismissed from the force and his certification was revoked." "That's rare," Amara observed. "It shouldn't be," Rodriguez replied, his voice firm. "Look, I understand your hesitation. The system often protects its own at the expense of justice. But things are changing slowly but surely, and this case has something many don't: clear video evidence and a credible witness." Amara sipped her tea thoughtfully. "I've been pulled over 7 times since moving to Riverdale. 7 times in 3 years with no tickets issued. Always routine checks that somehow only seem routine for people who look like me." Rodriguez nodded, letting her speak without interruption. "Each time, I told myself it wasn't worth making waves. I have a good life here otherwise. I love my work at the hospital. My neighbors are mostly kind and I've made friends. Why risk all that by becoming the doctor who sued the police?" "I understand," Rodriguez said quietly. "The path of least resistance is often the most tempting, but sometimes the hardest path is also the most necessary." Amara met his gaze steadily. "What you saw that night, it wasn't just about me. If Officer Jenkins treats a doctor that way, how does he treat people without my education or resources? People who don't speak English well? People who are already afraid of police?" "Exactly," Rodriguez agreed. "This is bigger than one incident. That's why I need your help." Amara set down her mug. "What exactly would I need to do?" "A formal statement to Internal Affairs. Possibly testimony at a disciplinary hearing. It won't be pleasant. Jenkins's union representative will try to discredit you, suggest you were actually impaired or that you were uncooperative. But the video evidence supports your account." Amara thought for a moment. "When I was in medical school, an attending physician once told me, 'If not you, then who? If not now, then when?' He was talking about difficult surgical cases, but I think it applies here too." She straightened her shoulders slightly. "I'll do it. Whatever is needed." Rodriguez smiled, genuine relief in his expression. "Thank you. I know it's not an easy decision. It isn't, she agreed. But neither was moving across the country to take a job in a small town where I knew no one. I've faced harder things. They spent the next half hour discussing the details, when she would give her statement, what to expect from the process, and the timeline for the investigation. As they were finishing, Rodriguez's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and his expression tightened. Problem? Amara asked. Possibly, he replied. Some of the officers are organizing a show of support for Jenkins tomorrow. A sort of protest against his suspension. Is that normal? Unfortunately, yes. The blue wall of silence is real, Dr. Chen. When an officer is disciplined, others often close ranks regardless of the circumstances. Amara frowned. Even when there's clear evidence of misconduct? Sometimes, especially then, Rodriguez said grimly. It becomes about loyalty rather than right and wrong. Not all officers will participate. Many good cops are just as disgusted by bad behavior as civilians are. But enough will make their feelings known. And how does that affect the investigation? It doesn't directly, but it creates pressure. It sends a message to other officers that speaking out against a colleague is disloyal. He sighed. It's one of the biggest obstacles to meaningful police reform. Amara considered this. So even with your rank and authority, this isn't a simple matter of enforcing the rules. No, Rodriguez admitted. It's about changing a culture. That's much harder and takes much longer. Why take it on? Amara asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. You could have looked the other way that night. Many would have. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to share. My younger brother was beaten by police when he was 17. He wasn't doing anything wrong, just walking home from his after-school job. One of the officers decided he looked suspicious. My brother spent 3 days in the hospital with broken ribs and a fractured eye socket. I'm so sorry, Amara said softly. The officers claimed he resisted arrest, attacked them. There were no cameras then, no witnesses willing to speak up. The department cleared them of any wrongdoing. Rodriguez's voice remained steady, but his eyes reflected an old pain. That's when I decided to become a police officer. I wanted to change things from the inside. Has it worked? Amara asked. Sometimes, he replied with a small smile. I've trained dozens of rookies over the years, taught them that their authority comes with responsibility. I've reported officers who crossed the line. I've testified against former colleagues when necessary. It's cost me friends, promotions, even my marriage. But every time I see a young officer de-escalate a situation instead of making it worse, I know it matters. Amara nodded, a new understanding in her eyes. Thank you for sharing that with me. And for stopping that night. I almost didn't, Rodriguez admitted. I was tired heading home after a long day. But something about the scene bothered me, and I'm glad I trusted that instinct. As they prepared to leave, Rodriguez handed Amara a business card with his personal cell number written on the back. If you experience any harassment, any retaliation at all, call me directly. Day or night. Do you expect that to happen? Amara asked, pocketing the card. I hope not, Rodriguez replied honestly. But Jenkins has friends in the department and in town. And people like him don't usually go down quietly. Outside the cafe, as they were about to head to their respective vehicles, Rodriguez added, One more thing. Dr. Chen, I can't promise that this investigation will end exactly as we hope. The system is imperfect, but I can promise you that it won't be swept under the rug. Not this time. That's all anyone can ask for, Amara replied. A fair process. As she walked to her car, Amara felt both lighter and heavier than before. Lighter for having decided to speak up. Heavier with the responsibility of following through. Whatever came next, she had made her choice. If not her, then who? If not now, then when? Across town, unaware of this conversation, Officer Jenkins sat in a dimly lit bar surrounded by a half-dozen fellow officers, all in plain clothes, all off-duty. He leaned forward, voice low but intense. Rodriguez has only been here a month and he's already choosing outsiders over his own officers, he said. Bitterness evident in every word. He doesn't understand how things work here. The union's got your back, one of the others assured him. They can't fire you over one complaint. Jenkins took a long swallow of his beer. It's not just the suspension. He's digging into my old stops, looking for a pattern. If enough people complain, then we make sure they don't want to complain, another officer suggested, his voice dropping even lower. This doctor, what's her name, Chen? She needs to understand how things work in Riverdale, too. Jenkins looked up sharply. What are you suggesting, Howell? Officer Howell shrugged. Nothing specific. Just that sometimes people reconsider their statements when they realize the consequences. For a moment, Jenkins considered the implied suggestion. Then he shook his head. No, nothing like that. We do this by the book. The union lawyer says I've got a good chance if I play it smart. Howell looked disappointed but nodded. Your call. But the rest of us are still planning that show of support tomorrow. Let Rodriguez know he can't just throw one of our own under the bus without consequences. Jenkins raised his glass in acknowledgement, but his mind was elsewhere. He was already thinking about his meeting with the union representative in the morning, planning his defense. One way or another, he wasn't going down without a fight. 3 weeks passed in a blur of depositions, interviews, and rising tensions. Amara had given her formal statement to Internal Affairs, a process that took nearly 4 hours as they reviewed the video footage with her, asking for her account of each interaction. Throughout it all, she remained composed and precise, the same careful attention to detail that made her an excellent surgeon, serving her well in this very different context. The morning of the disciplinary hearing arrived with a heavy fog that shrouded Riverdale in a ghostly haze. Amara stood in front of her bathroom mirror, carefully applying minimal makeup and securing her hair in a neat bun. She had chosen a conservative navy blue suit, professional, understated, appropriate for the occasion. As she fastened a simple silver necklace, her phone buzzed with a text message from Captain Rodriguez. Car will pick you up in 20 minutes. Side door, as discussed. The precautions hadn't been her idea. 2 days after their meeting at the Bean, Amara had discovered her car tires slashed in the hospital parking lot. No note, no witnesses, just the clear message that someone was unhappy with her. Rodriguez had immediately arranged for increased patrols near her home and workplace, and for today, secured transportation to and from the hearing. As promised, a dark sedan pulled up to the side entrance of her building exactly 20 minutes later. The driver, a female officer Amara hadn't met before, introduced herself as Lieutenant Patel. Dr. Chen, I'm your escort today. Captain Rodriguez thought you might be more comfortable with me than a male officer. Amara nodded appreciatively and got into the back seat. Thank you for doing this. I feel a bit ridiculous with all these precautions. Patel glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Better safe than sorry. Most officers are good people who respect the law, but it only takes one who doesn't to cause real trouble. The drive to the municipal building where the hearing would take place was silent. Amara watched the familiar streets of her adopted hometown pass by, wondering how many of her neighbors knew what was happening today, how many had already taken sides. As they approached, Amara saw a small group of uniformed officers gathered on the sidewalk near the entrance, perhaps 15 in all. Some held coffee cups, others stood with arms crossed, all wore solemn expressions, a show of support for Jenkins, just as Rodriguez had predicted. We'll go in through the back, Patel said, driving past the main entrance and turning down a side street. No need to walk through that. Inside, the building was quieter, though the tension was palpable. Patel escorted Amara to a small waiting room where Captain Rodriguez stood talking quietly with a woman in a crisp pantsuit. Dr. Chen, Rodriguez greeted her with a brief handshake. This is Diane Powell from Internal Affairs. She'll be presenting the department's case today. Powell nodded professionally. Thank you for being here, Dr. Chen. I know this isn't easy. What should I expect? Amara asked. The disciplinary committee consists of 5 members, 2 senior officers from outside our precinct, a representative from the city attorney's office, a civilian appointed by the mayor, and Chief Watkins, Rodriguez explained. They've all reviewed the evidence already. Today is about formal statements and questions. Jenkins and his union representative will be there, Powell added. He'll have the opportunity to present his side and question you. I won't lie, it may get uncomfortable. His representative will likely try to suggest you were actually impaired or that you were uncooperative. I've dealt with hostile questioning before, Amara replied calmly. Medical malpractice attorneys aren't known for their gentle approach either. Powell smiled slightly. Good. Just stick to the facts as you remember them. The video supports your account, but your testimony matters. It puts a human face to what might otherwise be dismissed as a procedural issue. A clerk appeared at the door. They're ready. The hearing room was arranged like a small courtroom with the committee seated at a raised table at the front. Jenkins sat at one table with an older man in an expensive suit, his union representative, Amara assumed. Powell directed her to the second table, where she and Rodriguez took seats. Chief Watkins, a stern-looking man with salt and pepper hair, called the hearing to order. We're here today to review the conduct of Officer Thomas Jenkins on the night of April 15th, specifically his treatment of Dr. Amara Chen during a traffic stop. This is not a criminal proceeding, but an internal disciplinary review. What followed was a methodical presentation of evidence. First, the dashboard camera video, played in its entirety for the committee, then testimony from Captain Rodriguez about what he witnessed after arriving on the scene. Throughout it all, Jenkins sat stone-faced, occasionally whispering to his representative but otherwise showing no reaction. When it was Amara's turn to speak, she approached the small podium set up for witnesses. After being sworn in, she recounted the events clearly and factually, from being pulled over without cause to the increasingly humiliating tests Jenkins had forced her to perform. Dr. Chen, one of the committee members asked, "In your opinion, was Officer Jenkins following standard procedure for a suspected DUI stop?" "No," Amara replied confidently. "As a physician, I'm familiar with standard field sobriety tests. They're designed to assess coordination and cognitive function in specific, measurable ways. What Officer Jenkins asked me to do, reciting the alphabet backward while balancing on one foot, or hopping while patting my head and rubbing my stomach, those aren't legitimate assessments. They were designed to humiliate me." When she finished her testimony, Jenkins's representative stood for cross-examination. He was smooth, practiced, and immediately aggressive. "Dr. Chen, isn't it true that after a 16-hour shift you could appear impaired even without alcohol? Fatigue can mimic intoxication, can't it?" "Yes, fatigue can affect coordination," Amara acknowledged. "But Officer Jenkins claimed he smelled alcohol, which was impossible since I don't drink. And fatigue doesn't explain why he chose to administer non-standard, humiliating tests rather than a simple breathalyzer from the beginning. And isn't it possible that you simply misinterpreted Officer Jenkins's comments, that what you perceived as racial comments were simply attempts at friendly conversation?" Amara looked directly at the committee, not at the representative. "When someone says, 'You people always think you know better,' there's not much room for misinterpretation." The questioning continued for nearly an hour, with Jenkins's representative trying various angles to undermine her credibility. Through it all, Amara remained composed, neither defensive nor angry, just steadily insistent on the truth of her experience. Finally, it was Jenkins's turn to speak. His version painted a very different picture, a concerned officer dealing with a potentially impaired driver who became argumentative and uncooperative. "I was just doing my job," he insisted, looking directly at the committee. "The roadside tests I used might not be standard, but they're effective at assessing coordination. I've been doing this for 8 years. I know an impaired driver when I see one." "And the comments Dr. Chen referenced?" Chief Watkins asked. "About you people?" Taken out of context, Jenkins replied smoothly, "I meant doctors, not, I have nothing against people from different backgrounds. Some of my closest friends are—" "The video speaks for itself," Powell interrupted, standing. Officer Jenkins's words and actions that night violated department policy on multiple levels: unnecessary detention, failure to follow proper DUI assessment protocols, and unprofessional conduct with racial overtones. After both sides had presented their cases, the committee adjourned to deliberate. Amara, Rodriguez, and Powell waited in the same small room as before. "You did well," Powell told her. "Very credible, very precise. And what happens now?" Amara asked. "They'll deliberate and make a recommendation," Rodriguez explained. "Could be anything from dismissal of the complaint to termination of employment. Chief Watkins makes the final decision based on their recommendation. How long will that take? Hard to say. Could be hours, could be." The door opened and the clerk reappeared. "They're ready to announce their decision." Rodriguez looked surprised. That was fast, usually a good sign. Back in the hearing room, Chief Watkins looked grim as he addressed the assembled group. "The committee has reviewed all evidence and testimony in this matter and has reached a unanimous decision. We find that Officer Thomas Jenkins violated department policies regarding proper procedure during traffic stops, professional conduct, and equal treatment of all citizens regardless of race or background." Jenkins stiffened in his seat, his expression darkening. "Furthermore, Watkins continued. A review of Officer Jenkins's record reveals a concerning pattern of similar behavior that was not previously addressed due to lack of corroborating evidence. In light of these findings, the committee recommends immediate termination of employment, with a note in Officer Jenkins's file that may affect future law enforcement certification. The room was utterly silent for a moment. Then Jenkins's representative leaned over and whispered something urgently to him. Jenkins shook his head angrily. "Chief Watkins, I request the opportunity to resign instead of facing termination," he said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. Watkins shook his head. "That option might have been available before this hearing, Officer Jenkins. It's not on the table now. Your actions reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to serve and protect all citizens equally. I am accepting the committee's recommendation in full. You are hereby terminated from the Riverdale Police Department, effective immediately." In the hallway afterward, Amara stood quietly as Rodriguez and Powell discussed next steps. The reality of what had just happened was still sinking in. "Dr. Chen," Rodriguez said, turning to her, "Lieutenant Patel will take you home whenever you're ready and thank you. Your courage today made a difference," Amara nodded. "What happens now?" "With the department, I mean." "Change," Rodriguez replied simply. "Starting tomorrow, we implement new training protocols for traffic stops. Body cameras for all officers, not just dashboard cams. An independent civilian review board for complaints. It won't fix everything overnight, but it's a start." "And you think it will work?" Amara asked. Rodriguez smiled slightly. "I think it has to. One case at a time, one department at a time. That's how change happens, not all at once, but eventually." As Lieutenant Patel drove her home, Amara watched the town passing by outside her window. The same streets, the same buildings, but somehow everything looked different. Standing up had cost her peace of mind, security, even a few nights' sleep. But as she thought about the next person Jenkins might have pulled over someone without her resources or captain, Rodriguez showing up at the right moment, she knew it had been worth it. The fog was finally lifting from Riverdale, both literally and figuratively. It wouldn't be the end of the story. Real change never came that easily, but it was at least a beginning.